Meanwhile, tonight, we continue making good on our commitment to bring you the very latest from the tense standoff at the Venezuelan embassy, not far from our studios, right here in our nation's capital. And here's the digression of events, right? Several weeks ago, the U.S. intervened in what many called a coup in Venezuela. The plan was for Juan Guaido to take power there and at the same time take over the Venezuelan embassy here by handing it over to a Guaido ally, a guy named Carlos Vecchio, who would be the new ambassador for Venezuela or for the Guaido government, right? So the first part, the coup, it failed in Venezuela. The second part, what happens to the embassy changeover here? Well, that was thwarted as well when U.S. backers of the current Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro joined with anti-U.S. interventionists, and they literally moved into this embassy. So this week, the secret police, as you saw on our air, moved in, cut the locks, and then they read an official eviction notice. But when they left, the pro-Maduro inhabitants failed to leave. So that, of course, made the pro-Guaido protesters out on the streets really angry and really loud. So now what? What are the risks? What are the rewards for the Trump administration during this standoff? Now, as we're covering this story, we learned tonight that there may be a huge developing story that could make all of this void. Michele Greenstein is joining us now from the embassy where she's been covering this story with what may be a huge development out of, what is it, Norway, Michele?
Oslo, Norway, that's correct. So we're hearing reports that representation from both the Venezuelan opposition and the Venezuelan government traveled to Norway over the weekend to re-explore the possibility of opening up a dialogue. This is, of course, a dialogue that has been pretty much wrecked since the beginning of this year when U.S.-backed opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself to be the legitimate president. Now, reports say that the first meeting happened yesterday and that a second meeting happened early this morning. Now, these are anonymous sources, so let's take that with a grain of salt. Neither party has officially declared this meeting to have happened, but when the Venezuelan ambassador to the UN was asked about this trip to Norway, he did not deny. On the other hand, some sectors of the Venezuelan opposition say that they are not open to dialogue. They are not all on the same page when it comes to this, and they also deny any involvement in this alleged trip to Norway. Yeah, well, that's historically consistent with what happens in cases like this. The opposition, just telling you from my experiences with negotiations, for example, with the Castro government, the opposition will never admit to sitting down and talking to the other side because they lose credibility then with their followers. Right. But the mere fact, Michele, that these two sides may be talking is incredibly interesting news, right? Based on what we have been reporting for the last couple of weeks. Right, and it would make sense that a lot of corporate media isn't really reporting on this because, of course, this brings up the possibility of peace, and there are many sectors of the U.S. government as well as the U.S. economy that would do very well if there was an outright war. Although when it comes to the question of actual either military aid or a military invasion from the U.S. into Venezuela, despite all the boisterous talk from John Bolton, Pompeo, Elliott Abrams, the special envoy to Venezuela, and Trump himself about all options being on the table, about the possibility of a military intervention, there's a piece of sound that I actually want you to listen to, Rick, and it has to do with just that. So let's take a listen.
What are your thoughts about possible military aid to the President Guaido?
You know, we are not going to do that.
Yeah, I think it's
unless the regime does something completely crazy, like attacking the U.S. embassy. We are trying to make the Venezuelan military nervous, and we think that it is a mistake tactically to give them endless reassurances that there will never be American military action.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, this is not what we're doing. What we're doing is what you see: financial pressure, economic pressure, diplomatic pressure, political pressure.
I agree with you.
So
this, I think, is highly significant.
Yeah.
Because that was Mr. Elliott Abrams, who's been appointed by the Trump administration as special envoy to Venezuela. Pompeo said he was in charge of all things Venezuela. And here he is saying that all the talk about military intervention is really just to scare the Maduro government. Now, of course, the U.S. has instead chose to do this through economic means, through sanctioning the country, through trying to freeze the Maduro government's assets. And as we know, of course, sanctions are meant to be an escalation to war. They are a tool of war because the population at home, of course, will suffer. In fact, there was that report that you and I reported on earlier this month from CEPR saying that U.S. sanctions to Venezuela are linked to at least 40,000 deaths. I think this is a piece of sound that it makes sense was not really reported on by Western corporate media because they're trying to hype up this possibility of the U.S. flat out invading. So
in other words, Abrams is copping to the fact that we're going to put the squeeze on them and make them suffer, hopefully to get them to break. Now, I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.